I walked into the living room, expecting a normal Sunday dinner, but the air felt heavy and cold. My father was standing by the mahogany table, his face a shade of red I had never seen before. Without saying a single word, he slammed a thick stack of papers onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. My sister, Talia, was standing right beside him. She wasn't looking at me. Instead, she was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, looking absolutely heartbroken. "How could you do this?" my father barked, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and deep hurt. I stepped forward, confused, and looked at the document. It was a bank statement showing a transfer of $50,000 from his retirement savings directly into my personal savings account. My name was right there in bold letters. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Talia finally looked up, her eyes swimming with fake tears. "I didn't want to believe it, Dad," she sobbed. "But I saw the notification on your tablet and tracked it. It led straight to her." I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was filled with sand. This wasn't a mistake. As I locked eyes with Talia, I saw a tiny cold spark of triumph. This was a setup. The interrogation began immediately, and it was the most painful experience of my life. My father paced the room, demanding to know why I needed the money so badly. Every time I tried to explain that I hadn't even logged into my bank account in days, Talia would chime in with a helpful detail. She reminded everyone that I had used Dad's laptop last Tuesday to print some documents, implying that was when I stole his login information. She talked about how I had mentioned being stressed about my car payments lately, even though I had never said any such thing. My mother sat on the sofa, her head in her hands. When she finally looked at me, the sheer disappointment in her eyes crushed me more than the false accusation ever could. "We raised you better than this," she whispered, her voice cracking. My siblings and cousins stayed back, looking at me like I was a common criminal. No matter what I said, the evidence on the table screamed my guilt. It was a perfect trap. Just as the family decided I was guilty and dismissed me from the room, Talia brushed past me. She leaned in close, her voice a chilling whisper that no one else could hear. "You should have been more careful," she sneered. I retreated to my room and locked the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt like I was drowning in a nightmare. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out my laptop, my hands shaking so hard I could barely type. I logged into my bank portal, praying that the statement my father had was just a clever Photoshop job. But when the screen loaded, my stomach dropped. There it was. $50,000 was sitting in my balance, glowing like a neon sign of my supposed crime. I scrolled down to the transaction details, feeling sick. Then, something caught my eye that didn't make sense. I clicked on the Security and Login History tab. My breath hitched. There was a login from 3 nights ago at 11:45 p.m. I was fast asleep at that time. Even more suspicious, the login came from an unfamiliar mobile device, a brand of phone I didn't own. My mind began to race as the pieces started to fit together. Someone had used an external device to break into my account and move the money there. It wasn't just a random hack. It was a targeted hit designed to make me look like a thief. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a misunderstanding. I was fighting a deliberate, calculated plot. The next morning, I caught Talia in the kitchen while our parents were out in the garden. I didn't want to play games anymore. I walked straight up to her and showed her the screenshot of the login history on my phone. "I know what you did, Talia," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. An unknown device accessed my account at midnight on Wednesday. I was asleep, but you were up studying in the living room. Talia didn't flinch. She didn't even stop pouring her orange juice. Instead, she turned to me with a calm, beautiful smile that felt more threatening than if she had started screaming at me. She leaned against the counter and took a slow sip of her drink. "That's a nice story, but who are Mom and Dad going to believe?" she asked softly. Her confidence was terrifying. She wasn't panicking because she had planned for this. She challenged me to prove that the device belonged to her, knowing full well that I didn't have access to her phone. She moved toward the door, stopping just long enough to look back over her shoulder. The mask of the grieving sister was gone, replaced by a cold arrogance. "Give it up. No one is going to believe you anyway," she added. I stood there alone, feeling the weight of her words. I knew I couldn't win this fight inside the house, so I headed to the bank downtown. I needed professional help. When I walked into the manager's office, I could tell he had already seen the flag transaction. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "It's a very clear-cut case of internal transfer," he said, tapping his pen on his desk. I took a deep breath and laid out my findings. I explained the login discrepancy and showed him the timestamps. At first, he seemed ready to show me the door, but then his eyes narrowed as he looked closer at the screen. "Wait a minute," he muttered. He began typing rapidly on his keyboard, pulling up the deep metadata of the account. He revealed that there hadn't just been a login, there was a password reset tied to my account just 10 minutes before the transfer happened. He checked the recovery email logs and saw that a temporary code had been sent, but then immediately deleted from the server. My heart soared. The timeline matched perfectly with the day Talia had asked to borrow my laptop to look up a recipe. She must have used my saved browser cookies to bypass the security. The manager looked up at me, his expression shifting. "This is highly unusual. We need to run a deeper forensic check on that device ID." Back at the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. It was like I had become a ghost in my own home. My parents didn't invite me to join them for lunch, and when I walked through the hallway, my brother looked away as if I were contagious. The emotional distance was far worse than the anger. It felt like they had already erased me from the family. Meanwhile, Talia was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She spent the afternoon helping Mom with the laundry and sitting with Dad on the porch, acting like she was the one who was hurt but was trying to be strong for the sake of the family. She was playing the victim perfectly, even going so far as to say she forgave me for the stress I had caused. Watching her manipulate them made my blood boil. I sat in the shadows of the dining room, watching them through the window. This wasn't just about $50,000. Talia had plenty of money from her own job. This was about something much bigger. She was systematically destroying my reputation and my place in this family. I started to wonder what the end goal was. What did she actually gain from making me the villain? There had to be a reason for this much effort. I was sitting in the attic later that evening, looking through old photo albums, when a memory suddenly resurfaced. It was from 2 weeks ago, during a quiet dinner when Talia wasn't there. Dad had mentioned that he was finally updating his will and redistributing his assets. He had talked about setting up a trust fund and making sure everything was split fairly between us. He had even said he was considering making me the primary executor because of my steady nature. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. If I was seen as an untrustworthy thief who stole from his retirement, I wouldn't just lose my parents' love. I would be cut out of the will completely. Talia wasn't just trying to get me in trouble for a few weeks. She was making a strategic move to ensure she inherited everything. She wanted to be the sole, trusted child so she could control the family's future wealth. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a sibling spat. It was a cold-blooded financial execution. She was willing to ruin my entire life just to get a bigger piece of the pie. Knowing the motive gave me a new sense of urgency. I wasn't just fighting for my name anymore. I was fighting for my survival. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was the bank manager. I stepped into the backyard to take the call, making sure Talia wasn't listening from the kitchen window. "We've made progress on the device ID," the manager said, his voice sounding much more serious now. He explained that the specific digital fingerprint of the phone used to access my account had been logged in their system before. My heart started pounding, so hard I could hear it in my ears. I asked him if they could tell me who the device belonged to. There was a long, professional hesitation on the other end of the line. "Technically, I shouldn't tell you this until the official police report is filed," he whispered. "But I can see that this same device has been used to log into another account at this branch multiple times over the last year." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Whose account?" I pressed. The manager let out a long sigh. "It belongs to Talia Sullivan." I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. I finally had something solid. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. I had a digital trail that linked her personal device to the crime. Talia thought she was a genius, but she had made the one mistake all tech thieves make. She used her own hardware. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering all the evidence I had. I printed out the login logs, the password reset timestamps, and a summary of my conversation with the bank manager. My hands were trembling as I organized the papers into a folder. I felt like I was holding a live wire. I was ready to end this, but as I stood at my bedroom door, a sudden doubt crept in. What if they still chose to believe her? Talia was the perfect daughter. She was the one who never got into trouble, while I was always the quiet one who stayed in the background. She had spent years building up her image, and she had spent the last few days cementing my guilt. When I finally walked into the living room, the whole family was there. Talia was sitting on the arm of Dad's chair, looking completely unbothered. She was laughing at a joke my brother made, looking like she had already won the war. She didn't even look at me as I approached the center of the room. I took a deep breath and placed the folder down on the coffee table. The sound made everyone look up. I knew this moment would change everything. "We need to talk," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. My father looked at the folder with a heavy frown, but he reached out and opened it anyway. I watched his eyes move across the pages. I saw the moment the confusion started to replace his anger. He saw the device ID and the name, Talia Sullivan, highlighted in the bank's internal logs. My mother leaned in, looking over his shoulder, her face turning pale. She looked between me and Talia, her expression uncertain for the first time since this whole mess started. Talia realized something was wrong. She stood up, her face a mask of concern. "What is this, Naomi? More fake excuses?" she asked, her voice high and sharp. She grabbed the report from Dad's hands and skimmed it quickly. I expected her to crack, but she was faster than I thought. She let out a dry, forced laugh and tossed the paper back on the table. "This is just a coincidence," she said, looking straight at our parents. "Naomi probably just used my old phone that I traded in months ago to do this. She's trying to plant new doubts because she knows she's caught." The room shifted again. I could see my father's jaw set. Talia was planting seeds of doubt, making it seem like I was the one who was being manipulative. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Talia didn't stop there. She immediately flipped the narrative with a level of skill that was terrifying to watch. She looked at my parents with tears welling up in her eyes, real tears this time. "Don't you see what she's doing?" Talia cried. "She's desperate. She's been caught stealing, so now she's trying to frame her own sister to escape the blame. She probably hacked my old accounts to make it look like this." She turned to me, her face full of righteous anger. "How could you be so cruel, Naomi? Isn't it enough that you stole from Dad? Now you want to ruin my life too." My brother and cousins began to lean back toward her side, nodding as if her explanation made perfect sense. I felt the truth slipping through my fingers like sand. No matter what proof I brought, Talia was ready to twist it into a weapon against me. I realized that as long as it was just digital records, she could always claim I was a tech-savvy thief who had faked them. I felt a cold chill of despair. I knew then that I needed something undeniable. I needed something that didn't just show a device ID. I needed something that showed her face or her location. I needed the one thing she couldn't explain away as a hack. I left the house without saying another word, ignoring the calls from my mother. I went straight back to the bank. I told the manager that Talia was claiming I had framed her using an old device. "I need more," I told him, my voice pleading. "Is there anything else in the logs? Anything that shows where the device was when the transfer happened?" The manager looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. He pulled up the forensic review again and started digging into the geolocation pings. Every time a banking app is opened, it pings the nearest cell tower for security. "Here we go," he said, his eyes lighting up. He revealed that there was a location ping tied to the suspicious login at 11:45 p.m. My pulse quickened to a gallop. I leaned over his shoulder, watching the map load on his screen. The blue dot didn't stay at our house. It showed that the device had been active at a specific coordinate about 2 miles away from our neighborhood. I asked for the address, hoping with everything I had that this was the breakthrough I needed. The manager typed in the coordinates, and a street address appeared. It was a 24-hour cafe downtown. My heart leaped. Talia had told everyone she was at home in her room that night. If I could prove she was at that cafe, her entire story would crumble. I drove to the cafe as fast as the speed limit allowed. It was a trendy place with bright lights and a long counter. I walked in, my heart hammering. The air smelled like roasted beans and sugar. I went straight to the counter and asked to speak to the night manager. A young woman with tired eyes came over. I pulled out a photo of Talia from my phone. "Was this girl here on Wednesday night around midnight?" I asked. The woman looked at the photo and then at me, looking suspicious. "We get hundreds of people in here. I can't remember everyone," she said. I felt my hope start to dim. Just as I was about to give up and walk away, a waiter who was clearing a nearby table stopped. He squinted at the photo on my screen. "Oh, I remember her," he said. She was sitting in the corner booth near the back. She stood out because she was wearing a very expensive-looking silk tracksuit and had 2 different laptops open. My breath caught in my throat. That was exactly what Talia had been wearing that night. But then the waiter said something that changed everything. She wasn't alone, though. She was meeting some guy. They were hunched over the screens like they were planning a heist or something. The waiter's words felt like a cold splash of water. Talia wasn't alone. My mind spun with the new information. Who would help her do something like this? The waiter couldn't remember much about the man, only that he was older, wearing a dark hoodie, and seemed very focused on the technical side of whatever they were doing. This raised so many more questions. Why did Talia need help? She was smart, but maybe she wasn't confident enough to handle the actual hacking and the deletion of the security logs by herself. I realized that this conspiracy went deeper than I had ever imagined. Talia hadn't just made a mistake. She had hired or convinced someone else to help her ruin me. I asked the manager if they had security footage, but she shook her head. "Our system was down for maintenance that night," she said. I felt a pang of frustration. I had a witness, but would my parents believe a random waiter over their perfect daughter? Probably not. I needed to know who that man was. If I could find the link between them, I could prove the entire thing was a coordinated hit. I left the cafe, my mind buzzing with theories, feeling like I was finally seeing the true shape of the monster I was fighting. I went back home and waited until everyone was asleep. I knew Talia had an old tablet she rarely used, which she kept in the guest room drawer. If she had been talking to this mystery man, she might have used a device that wasn't her primary phone. I crept into the room, my heart in my throat. I found the tablet buried under some old magazines. It was password protected, but I tried her birthday, then our dog's name, and finally, her graduation year. The screen swiped open. I went straight to the messaging apps. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the device. I found an unfamiliar contact saved only as M. The messages were chilling. "Is the account ready?" M had asked. Talia had replied, "Yes, I have the login. We just need to make it look real." It has to look like she did it from her own laptop. My blood turned to ice as I read the words. They were planning the entire thing. But as I scrolled up, I realized the messages were incomplete. Huge chunks of the conversation had been deleted, leaving only fragments of their scheme. It was like looking at a puzzle with half the pieces missing. I needed to see the rest. I needed to know what M stood for and what they had planned next. I couldn't wait any longer. I took the tablet and marched straight into Talia's room, flipping on the lights. She bolted upright, looking disoriented and angry. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. I held up the tablet, showing her the messages with M. "Explain this," I said, my voice cold. For a split second, I saw absolute terror in her eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen her look truly scared. But then, she scrambled out of bed and tried to snatch the tablet from my hands. "Give me that! You have no right to touch my things," she screamed. We ended up in a loud argument that echoed through the house. Within seconds, my parents were at the door, looking exhausted and angry. Talia immediately turned on the waterworks. She broke into my room. "She's stealing my tablet now. She's obsessed with trying to frame me," she wailed, clinging to my mother. My father looked at me with a look of pure exhaustion. "Naomi, enough," he said. "You're invading her privacy and making up more stories. Go to your room before I call the police myself." Once again, I was painted as the problem. Every piece of evidence I found was twisted into more proof of my instability. I felt completely cornered. I spent the next day in a state of total despair. I felt like I was screaming underwater. No matter what I found, Talia had a way to make me look like the villain. I considered giving up for the first time. Maybe it was better to just move out, take the blame, and start a new life far away from this toxic mess. But then, my phone rang again. It was the bank manager. "Naomi, you need to come in," he said, his voice sounding urgent. "We've completed the forensic review of the server-side logs, not just the device logs." I drove back to the bank for what felt like the 100th time. The manager handed me a thick, stapled report. "We found the digital ghost that was helping with the transfer," he explained. He pointed to a line of code in the report. It showed that the transfer wasn't just a simple click. It had been executed using a specialized script, a script that was identical to one used in a series of corporate bank frauds 2 years ago. Most importantly, the report contained a decrypted IP address that the M character had used to bridge into the cafe's Wi-Fi. My heart raced as I looked at the conclusion of the report. This wasn't just a lead. It was a smoking gun that proved the entire architecture of the lie. The report was a masterpiece of technical evidence. It confirmed that the login, the password reset, and the actual transfer were all done from the same physical device, Talia's phone. But the new data was even better. It showed that the device had been connected to a secondary control laptop at the cafe. The timestamps in the report aligned perfectly with the waiter's memory of Talia being there with the man. Most importantly, the report showed that the M contact had sent the final confirmation to Talia's device at the exact moment the money moved. It was a digital map of a conspiracy. This was the proof I had been waiting for. It was undeniable, scientific, and verified by the bank's highest security team. But I had learned my lesson from the previous confrontations. If I just showed this to my parents now, Talia would find a way to distract them or cry her way out of it. I needed to reveal it at a time when she couldn't run away. I needed a moment where the whole family would be forced to look at the truth without any interruptions. I checked the family calendar. The big Sunday dinner was coming up again, the one where even our extended family would be present. That would be my stage. Over the next few days, I watched Talia with a new perspective. She grew more confident every hour, acting like she was officially the trusted daughter again. She would sit at the head of the table, offering to help Dad with his retirement planning, the very thing she had tried to steal. One afternoon, she even had the nerve to pull me aside in the hallway. "You know, if you just apologize to everyone, I might be able to convince Dad to let you stay in the house," she said, her voice dripping with fake kindness. She actually wanted me to apologize for the crime she had committed. Her arrogance was staggering. It fueled my resolve like nothing else ever could. I didn't get angry. I just looked at her and nodded. "I'll think about that," I said quietly. Inside, I was counting down the hours. I wasn't just going to clear my name anymore. I was going to expose the depth of her greed and the cruelty of her plan. I spent my nights preparing the evidence, making copies of the forensic report for every person who would be at that dinner. My hands trembled as I worked, not from fear this time, but from the sheer anticipation of seeing her mask finally fall off. The day of the family dinner arrived. The house was filled with the smell of roasting chicken and the sound of my aunts and uncles laughing in the parlor. It was supposed to be a celebration of my father's birthday, which made Talia's betrayal feel even more disgusting. She was flitting around the room, playing the perfect hostess, handing out drinks and acting like the golden child. Everyone was avoiding me as usual, but I didn't care. I had my folder tucked under my arm, hidden in the study. I felt a strange sense of calm. As I watched Talia laugh with my cousins, I realized that this was the last time she would ever feel this powerful. I walked into the dining room and saw the table set for 12. This was where the lie had started, and this was where it would end. I went to the study and grabbed the 12 copies of the forensic report. My heart was thumping a steady rhythm against my chest. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the investigator, and the trial was about to begin. I walked toward the dining room as my father called everyone to take their seats. It was time to pull back the curtain. Dinner was halfway through when I decided to move. The conversation had turned to Dad's retirement, and Talia was right in the middle of it, giving advice on which stocks to avoid. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every head turned toward me. "I have something to say," I said, my voice clear and steady. Talia rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. "Naomi, not now. This is Dad's birthday," she groaned. But I didn't sit down. I walked around the table, placing a copy of the bank's final forensic report in front of every single person, including my aunts and uncles. "This is the final report from the bank's security team," I said. "It doesn't just show a transfer. It shows the device ID, the location pings, and the metadata of the conspiracy." The room went dead silent. My father picked up his copy, his eyes scanning the first page. He saw the verified device, Talia's phone lined in bold red ink. He saw the location pings at the cafe. My mother's hands began to shake as she read the timestamps that proved Talia wasn't in her room that night. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from annoyance to a chilling, heavy silence. Talia tried to jump in immediately, her voice rising in a frantic pitch. "This is just more of her fake tech stuff. She probably made this on her computer," she shouted, reaching across the table to grab the report from my uncle's hand. But my father held up a hand, silencing her. He was staring at the official bank seal and the signature of the head of security. "This is a certified document, Talia," he said, his voice sounding incredibly old. My mother looked at Talia, her eyes filled with a sudden, sharp realization. "Talia, you told us you were in bed by 11 that night. Why does this report show your phone was at the cafe downtown at midnight?" Talia's face went from pale to a ghastly, sickly white. She started to stammer, her eyes darting around the room looking for an escape. I must have left my phone in my car. Someone must have stolen it and brought it back," she cried. But the cracks were showing. My brother pointed to the next page. "It says here the phone was used to log into your social media account at the same cafe just 5 minutes before the transfer. Did the thief post your selfie too?" Talia looked like she was about to faint. The pressure in the room became unbearable. My father stood up, his shadow looming over the table. "Tell me the truth, Talia," he whispered. It was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. Talia looked around the table, seeing only cold, hard faces. Her aunts were whispering, and my brother was looking at her with total disgust. She tried to maintain the lie for one more second, but then she just broke. She slumped into her chair, her face buried in her hands. I didn't want to be second best anymore," she sobbed, the truth finally pouring out of her. She admitted everything. She admitted to meeting the man at the cafe, a guy she had paid to help her bypass the bank's security logs. She admitted that she did it because she heard Dad was going to make me the executor of the will. She was terrified of losing her position as the most important person in the family. She had staged the entire theft just to make me look like a criminal so I would be cut out of the inheritance. The room was stunned into absolute silence. The perfect sister had just confessed to a felony against her own father just to satisfy her greed. The aftermath of the confession was like the scene of a wreck. My parents were absolutely devastated. My mother was crying, not for me this time, but because she couldn't believe her own daughter could be so calculated and cruel. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He didn't yell. He just sat back down and stared at the wall, looking completely broken. Talia was a mess of tears and snot, begging for forgiveness, but nobody moved to comfort her. My brother stood up and walked over to me, putting a hand on my shoulder in a silent apology. I thought I would feel a massive sense of triumph, but I didn't. I just felt a profound sense of relief that the weight was finally off my shoulders. I wasn't the thief. I wasn't the failure. The truth hadn't just cleared my name, it had exposed the rotting core of our family dynamic. Talia's greed had destroyed her life, and her lie had nearly destroyed mine. As the dinner ended in a cold, silent cleanup, I realized that our family would never be the same again. The perfect mask was shattered into 1,000 pieces, and no amount of crying was going to put it back together. Weeks have passed since that night, and the house is much quieter now. My parents are slowly trying to rebuild their relationship with me, though the guilt they feel for believing the lie is still very visible. My father apologizes almost every time he sees me, which is a bit awkward, but I appreciate the effort. We've had long talks about the future, and he's made it clear that he's making things right legally. Talia is still around, but she's different now. She's lost that arrogant spark, and she spends most of her time in her room or at work, keeping her head down. She's being forced to pay back every cent of the legal and forensic fees I had to cover. At a small family gathering last night, my father took me aside on the porch. He looked out at the garden and sighed. "I'm so sorry we didn't listen to you, Naomi," he said sincerely. I looked at him and realized that I didn't need a grand apology or a huge celebration. I didn't even need revenge on Talia. Seeing her have to live with the truth of what she did was enough. I had my life back, my name was clean, and I could finally sleep at night. The truth was always enough,